Now, if you're going to be working in any type of Microsoft administration services these days, there are some fundamental principles that are very important that you understand. So what I want to do is I want to get into some of the foundations of understanding things like Microsoft domains, understanding some of the networking technologies, RAS and VPNs and virtualization, and also we're going to talk about the cloud services and how all that fits into this. But it's important to kind of start from the beginning so you can understand where things have been, understand where things are going, and you have to consider the fact that the world is transitioning now more into a cloud-oriented environment. But in the past, everything was managed on-prem or on-premise, and we got to talk about this transition and how things were and how things are now and where Microsoft is going. So to start with, we go back in time to the 1950s, 1960s. They had mainframes, these gigantic computers that would take up like entire rooms. They used vacuum tubes. And then as we moved into the 1970s, something miraculous happened. They created what was known as an IC, an integrated circuit, which allowed basically binary math to be processed through little chips. And this is where personal computing became popular. So in the 1980s, personal computers started coming out. I'm going to draw this little symbol here to represent a computer. And I tell you what, I'm going to create another little symbol here to kind of represent a bunch of computers. So in the 1980s, companies started buying PCs and personal computers, and they started showing up in people's offices, and eventually, they were networking them together and all of that. And so this is where things really get started. Now, of course, in those days, one of the problems was we lived in what was called a peer-to-peer network. So what would happen is these computers you could network these computers together with various technologies, but there was no centralization, meaning each computer was equal. There was no computer that controls all the other computers. A network admin would have to, if they wanted to make changes, they'd have to sit down at each and every computer to make those changes or get users to help them, which was always a nightmare. And so that didn't, it worked, but it didn't work very efficiently, all right? Now, as we moved into the 1990s, there was a company that was gaining ground called Novell, and they had a product called NetWare, which was the idea of that was to use a server that would help manage machines and also allow people to share files easier. Whereas in a peer-to-peer network back originally, these machines would have to share files with each other and people would have to know each other's passwords. It just didn't work very well. Well, eventually with the creation of the file server concept, you had a more powerful machine that you could share files on and all that. And eventually Novell even came out with the idea of a server that could manage other machines. Now this is kind of where Microsoft comes in. Microsoft created their product called NT, and they created this concept of a domain controller, which is a special type of server that can manage these other servers. Now, fast forward, they came out with what was known as a domain, but fast forward to the year 2000, Microsoft releases their newest domain technology, and they call it Active Directory. And Active Directory domains were represented by a triangle. All right, and a domain controller was a server essentially that had a database on it, and that database was the Active Directory database. So let's just kind of fix that here. This little cylinder looking thing I'm going to make here is going to represent my Active Directory database. So AD. All right, and this is what we still call to this day. We call it ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. And usually if you hear that term, Active Directory Domain Services, it means it's an on-premise domain. Although there is a version of this that can be hosted in the cloud known as Azure Active Directory Domain Services. I'm not getting into that right now. So anyway, you would always want to have more than one domain controller. The reason you want to have more than one domain controller is because the same reason you have more than one of any type of server, really. One reason being to break up the disbursement of load, these machines will authenticate with these domain controllers, and the more machines you got, you know, you don't want all of that just going to one domain controller, right? The other consideration is redundancy. If you only have one and that server goes down, well, you're in trouble, right? So we want to have multiple. The other thing about domain controllers that are interesting is that they replicate. So, for example, I'm going to make a little smiley face guy here, and this little smiley face guy is going to represent my user. So we create a user account on a domain controller. Now, the interesting thing about user accounts, or the interesting thing really about domain controllers, is that they replicate. So everything you do on one will replicate over to the other. So if I create a user account on that first one, well, replication is going to occur between both of them. And so this little arrow thing I'm going to make here is going to represent replication. So domain controllers replicate. That means that this user could log on to any one of these thousands machines, and it's going to, you know, authenticate with the domain controller. All right. The authentication protocol that is used is the protocol known as Kerberos. All right. Kerberos is the authentication protocol. What is a protocol? It's like a language, basically. Okay. Now there was an older protocol that it also supported called NTLM. That was for legacy, for older prior to the year 2000 machines. Now that protocol allowed us to have encrypted passwords and all that, and authenticate securely and all that fun stuff. The other thing is Active Directory uses a language known as the Directory Service Language, and that language was called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Now all that is, again, this is all decades old at this point. At the time when it came out, it was cutting edge, but it is a bit dated nowadays. But it still works, and it's still pretty secure, though there are some considerations on security that I'm not going to explain right now. Now, the other thing that's important about Active Directory is that all machines have to have a name. And the name must be, of course, associated with an IP address and all of that. And so there is a service that we use it on the internet all the time, called DNS, Domain Name Service. Our domain must have a name. Usually when you name your domain, you would name it after your company, and a lot of people even name their domains based on their web presence. So for example, my domain might be called examlabpractice.com. That's my company, my web presence. And I'm going to need to have a server in my domain that can associate the names and IP addresses together. So that server is called a DNS server. DNS, Domain Name System Server. And that server will also have to have a little database on it, and that database will be our DNS database. Okay. So we'll just draw another little cylinder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this, border it with red, and then I'm going to color code the database red, which means that this database, the DNS database, is associated with that name. Now what happens is our machines, clients, domain controllers, we also might even have, let's draw a file server over here. Pretty common that we have file servers in our environment. Okay. All of these machines would register with our DNS. All right. And this allows for the centralization of name resolution, meaning they register their IP addresses into this database, and then now anytime a machine needs to find another machine, it can query DNS. So for example, these machines all have to authenticate by your domain controllers. They can query DNS and say, hey, DNS, do you know what the address is of one of my domain controllers so I can authenticate? And DNS can reply back and say, yeah, here is the information. At that point, the client can go and authenticate. So it works very efficiently. Now, all of this together, this idea of domain controllers, this triangle you see here, this provides centralization. So we moved away from peer-to-peer networking back in the day where, you know, every machine was kind of its own boss and there was no centralized way of managing things, to now we are working in a centralized environment. These domain controllers help us centralize. This DNS service helps us centralize. So we now have some central control over things. One of the great things about our domain controllers too is we have these wonderful things called GPOs, group policy objects. A group policy object is this object that you can create that has all these settings, parameters, any type of attribute you want to configure or change on machines, you can do it through a GPO. So for example, if your boss walks up to you and says, hey, I want you to force the firewalls to be turned on all these machines. I want to make sure that the antivirus is always up to date. I want you to disable some of the wallpaper feature. I don't want people putting crazy wallpapers on their machine. So I mean, the sky's the limit. There are literally thousands of things you can do inside of a GPO. But what happens is that GPO can instruct these machines to turn things on and turn things off. GPOs also replicate. So when you create a GPO on a domain controller, it replicates over to the other domain controller. So it doesn't matter which machines authenticate with which domain controller. All right. So these GPOs can be deployed out to these machines, and this is how you turn things on, turn things off. You could even deploy software with that if you wanted to. So it was very, very powerful, a very, very powerful system for managing everything. All right. Of course, let's throw the internet into the mix here. Let's say that this little cloud is going to represent the internet, and let's talk about a little bit about how that sort of fits into the picture. Let me just clean it up here with the mighty stroke of my paintbrush. I will clean up the internet. All right. All right, so then we have the internet, right? So maybe we've got an internet connection that's coming in here, all right? And of course, you don't want to just leave your internal network exposed, so your company would generally have a firewall, right? And we'll just put that firewall right here. And so now we have a secure way for traffic to flow out to the internet, and the only things that can come in would be things that we send out, and we could allow things through that firewall if we want to. Now, this is a traditional domain. This is the way we've done things for 20 years, all right? And in this next little section, I want to talk about expansion on all of this and where things have gone with things like RAS and all that, and VPN and virtualization. So that'll wrap this little section up, and we'll move on to the next. I now want to talk about some concepts that are also sort of the foundation of how we've done things over the years. It's important to understand how we've done things over the years so we can understand how things are now. So looking back, we have an Active Directory domain, ADDS as it's called, Active Directory Domain Services, which uses the LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which uses Kerberos for authentication, or for the legacy back in the 90s devices that used NTLM, New Technology LAN Manager, which isn't all very new these days, but even Kerberos is pretty old considering, we've been using it for decades, and I think actually the protocol even came out back in the 1980s. So, we got some data technologies, but the technologies have been updated, a lot of them over the years, to be secure, so you can still feel comfortable using those. But let's talk about some different scenarios now. The first thing I want to look at is the scenario of what happens when we have a user who is not at the office. So this person is working from home. Working from home is a lot more popular nowadays than it has been in the past, so it's very common. And this person needs the ability perhaps to be able to connect in and access services that are inside. Okay, and we've got a file server, but ultimately you probably are aware that in the past it was always this mindset of do it yourself, host your own server. So your companies might have a file server, but then they might also have a they might have a SQL database server that users need to access. Let's create that SQL. All right. Maybe Microsoft Exchange. That was email, right? Microsoft Exchange was used for email, and then maybe even like SharePoint was very popular. by Microsoft on premise. So here you've got these, these 4 servers providing a service to our devices, and you've got users working from home and everything else needing to get access to those. Let me just kind of move those a little bit over here, make a little bit of room here, and I'm going to shrink those down just a little bit as well. All right. So this user who is working from home needs to access these services, but the person is not, not around. Well, let me tell you what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't just open up all the ports on the firewall and allow this person in to get access to these devices unsecurely. In fact, in the 90s, a lot of companies did that. The very first company I ever worked for, back in the 90s, they didn't really have a firewall, so you literally could share out you had a public address, and you could connect to it from home. It was really scary when I think about it. Even in the 90s, that was scary, but nowadays it's incredibly scary. Why is it scary? Because you got these people out there that want to do things that they shouldn't do, and get access to companies' data and try to do damage and ransom and all of that, ransomware and all that. And who are these people? Well, we generally call them hackers, right? So let me draw a little hacker. This little box here is going to represent my hacker. All right, and let's make this hacker look like he's up to no good. All right, I'm gonna give him let's give him like a devil horns, some devil horns here, and maybe he's in a bad mood. I'll give him a frowny face, and give him some fangs, and maybe the fangs are dripping blood okay, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry, sometimes I get carried away. All right, but anyway, that's going to be my hacker. All right, goofy looking little hacker person. All right, and so we don't want this hacker spying on my user. We don't want this hacker getting access to resources inside. So how do we get around that? Well, usually the way we would do that is you would use a VPN, a virtual private network. So the way you would do that is you could purchase what was called a VPN concentrator, and basically it's a device that allows secure connections in. But in the Microsoft world, we actually had a type of server we could set up called a RAS server, or also known as an RAS server because it stood for Routing and Remote Access Services. But anyway, remote access services is the idea here, and with that we have support for VPN. Now what does that do? This allows this thing called a VPN tunnel to be created, which means that you have this encrypted communications that goes through to that RAS server, and then from there that RAS server allows you to access other resources securely. This hacker will not be able to see the traffic that's flowing through because it's all encrypted. The only thing the hacker would be able to see is that it was going up to this firewall, and that would be it. Wouldn't be able to see what the traffic said. So this is how we would definitely help secure things. Now, the other thing that I want to talk to you about here is what happens when a company needs to have a service that is exposed to the internet. For example, let's say that your company is going to host their own web server, okay? So you set up a web server. All right, maybe this is going to be www.examlabpractice.com or whatever, and people from the internet need to be able to get to it anonymously. Well, how are you going to do that? Where are you going to put that web server? Are you going to put it internally inside the domain like you see here? And the reason that's scary is because you would have to open up port 443, port 80, which is the HTTP ports, to allow traffic to get in, which means not only could somebody out there on the internet anonymously get into this web server, but technically so could a hacker. And if a hacker was ever to gain access over this website by hacking it, then something called pivoting could occur, where a hacker could actually gain access to these other services that are on your network. And so that's where things are really scary. So you definitely won't want to host it internally most of the time, although there was a way to do something called a reverse proxy. I won't get into that right now. But we would probably want to put this outside, right? So we'd want to put it out here. But there's something else that's a problem on that. If you put it outside that firewall, you don't have to worry about people getting allowing traffic to come in. But the scary thing about that is the fact that this poor web server is now completely exposed to the internet, so with no protection. So the way around that usually is people would get another firewall. So you'd have two firewalls. This first firewall would be called the internal connected firewall, and then this firewall here would be called the external connected firewall. Now this little network between that, we would call that a DMZ, demilitarized zone, or now the more popular term is perimeter network. Okay, so DMZ, perimeter network are basically the same thing. All right. And so now what you would do is you would only open the ports like port 80, 443, 53 for DNS if you put DNS in there, whatever ports there that you need, and now traffic would be able to get to this web server. Okay, and so even if a hacker somehow hacks this web server, you're not going to allow traffic to pass through this firewall and get to these resources. The only traffic that you might allow would be VPN. Okay, and there's a bunch of authentication and all that has to happen to make that work. All right, so that's the idea of remote access and VPNs in a nutshell for you, as well as the concept of DMZ and the perimeter network idea. Now, the final thing I want to look at with you in this video is the idea of virtualization. So I talked about how in the past it was always the mindset was we got to host everything ourselves. We got to have our own little data center. We got to have our we got to have our own servers, file server, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, all that, and it's all got to be hosted by us. And that's the way things have always been done. All right. Now, then what you'll find is as time went on, a company called VMware came out with a way of expanding on virtualization. Just so you know, virtualization is not a new term. Virtualization has been around for a very long time. In fact, the term hypervisor is essentially the software that lets us emulate hardware. And if you can emulate hardware, you can also store software on that emulated hardware. That's the idea of virtualization. That term hypervisor has been around since the 1970s. The idea of even mainframes dividing up processing time and doing shared computing was a form of virtualization. So this is not a new concept, but VMware, they expanded on this idea, and the thing that they did that really pushed the envelope on all this was that, hey, you don't necessarily need 4 different servers. And here's the other thing. Here's the other crazy thing. If you wanted redundancy for those 4 servers, you'd really need 8 servers, right? You could do clustering those together. So you'd have 8 servers to provide redundancy for those. But with virtualization, I can set up a hypervisor server, 1 server, and virtualize those other servers. Now, in the Microsoft world, we call that Hyper-V. That is the software that does this, Hyper-V, hypervisor. Microsoft's not the one that came up with that. VMware is not the first to ever come up with that. VMware was the biggest contributor to this concept, though, so I do have to give them credit where credit is due. All right, now the other beautiful thing, though, about this is you get a really, really powerful machine. You virtualize your machines on those. You get these things called checkpoints in Microsoft. They used to be called snapshots, and a lot of other companies still call them snapshots, where you can make changes without the worry of breaking anything because you can revert back to before the change was made. The other thing that's wonderful about using virtualization is if I want to have complete redundancy, I don't have to have 8 servers. I could literally, purchase another server and have a copy of the virtual machines on that other server. Now I've only got 2 servers as opposed to having to have a total of 8 servers. Okay, so this is a very powerful feature capability that kind of started everything. Another thing that we got, and this is kind of where you start thinking about cloud computing, is with virtualization comes the term elasticity, which basically means that each of these machines can be given a certain amount of RAM processing power, but here's what's interesting about that. If one of the servers isn't using all of the available RAM that it's been given, it can share it with other servers. So for example, this file server has been given more RAM than it needs, and then SQL needs that RAM. The file server can give up some of that RAM over to SQL, and when SQL's done using that extra memory, it can release it back to everybody It's basically a pool type scenario where it gets released into a pool of RAM and pool of CPU, and they can grow and shrink as they need. And that's the a small way of sort of on-premise way of looking at elasticity. Of course, when you get into cloud computing, you'll learn that that can expand across multiple machines across the the board in these big data centers, but not to get into that just yet here. But that's the idea. Hopefully that now helps you with understanding that concept of what virtualization is, and with that is really where cloud computing started to come into play, which I'm not explaining in this video. But hopefully now you have a much better understanding of the concept of the RAS, VPN, as well the DMZ concepts and virtualization. And now in this next section we'll start getting into the concept of cloud services. Now, with the creation of virtualization, this got companies thinking, if we can emulate hardware, we can create these virtual machines, and we can store software on there. We can have operating systems running on that emulated hardware, the operating systems being called guest operating systems. We could technically host these virtual machines for companies for a price as a service. So the idea being, hey, you pay us a fee each month and we'll host your virtual servers, and you don't have to deal with all the headaches of hosting your own data center on premise, and the power that's needed to do that, and the air conditioning that's needed to do that, all the hardware that's needed to do that, as well as the knowledge of how all the hardware works. So this is essentially what a cloud company brings to the table. So various companies like Google and IBM and Microsoft and Apple and all these companies, a lot of them already had tons of data centers, these big massive warehouses all over the world that they could support it. Some of these companies, such as Microsoft and IBM and Amazon, and Amazon being one of the biggest and first, decided to open this up to the public for a fee and allow you to host your services in their data centers. So this is where cloud computing really comes into place. This big cloud here is going to represent cloud computing, mainly the Microsoft cloud computing. And of course it's all connected to the internet with incredibly fast, high-speed internet connections, fiber connections, and all of that. So there's some terminology or some acronyms I want to talk a little bit about real fast here as we get into this. First off, in cloud computing there is an acronym we call IaaS. That stands for Infrastructure as a Service. Okay? Infrastructure as a service means that a provider is hosting all of the hardware infrastructure for you, and then they are going to provide you with a way for you to interact with that hardware and utilize their hardware as a service. All right, and this of course is where Azure comes into play, Microsoft Azure. Now, you might pronounce that word different. People have different ways of saying Azure. Some people call it Azure, some people call it Azure, some people call it, I've even heard it called Azure before, Azure. There's various names for it. In fact, years ago when I was first learning Azure, I decided I wanted to make sure I was pronouncing this correctly. So I was like, I'm going to go to watch the developers. So I started watching videos of the developers, the people who created Azure, and I figured I would determine. The very first video I ever watched, the guy was pronouncing the word Azure, so that's how I say it. But what I further learned is that the Microsoft developers don't agree on how to say it either. Some of them say Azure, some of them call it Azure, some of them call it Azure. So anyway, tomato, tomato, pronounce it however you want to pronounce it, okay? But Azure is Microsoft's main IaaS system. What this is Microsoft is going to host, they've got all these data centers all over the world, and they're going to host their hardware so that you can host on top of their hardware your virtual machines or whatever it is. So you can host virtual machines. Microsoft will also allow you to have access to what are called virtual appliances, like virtual firewalls, also virtual load balancing software, because you can get access to what are called VNets, This is virtual networking, so you can create these virtual networks based on TCP/IP that are running your, in their cloud service with virtual machines on it, and then you can put a virtual firewall. So you can almost like recreate what you're seeing here in an on-premise environment. You can recreate that in the cloud. They also provide virtual storage, so you can store data and backup data out there. They support database hosting, all of that. That's all part of IaaS. Now with IaaS, the model for that, for the most part, is you pay for what you use. So there's an algorithm that looks at how much memory, how much processing power, how much storage that's being used, and then you get a fee each month for what you're using. The good news is they do have a calculator that kind of helps you forecast this. And you can even set alarms to let you know if you're approaching a certain budget that you've got on cost. There's a lot of things out there to help you do that. But that's the idea. You pay for what you use. Okay, now there is another couple of terms I want to mention as well. This next term is called Platform as a Service, and then there's a third term called Software as a Service. So Platform as a Service, PaaS, and Software as a Service. Platform as a Service and software. Let me explain software as a service first, because it's pretty easy to visualize, and then I'll explain platform as a service. So the idea of software as a service is basically they have applications that can be hosted in the cloud service, apps, if you will. These apps are 100% ready to use, ready for you to take advantage of. All you got to do is use those applications. Okay. For example, Microsoft has what's called Office for the web, or it used to be called Office Online. So that's like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You can run it from within your web browser. All you got to do is just jump right in and use it. So from an admin standpoint, all we have to do is assign the users that are allowed to use that, and they can go use it, and it's available to them 100%. All they got to do is start using it. There's not really a lot of administration for us. Now, what is Platform as a Service? Well, Platform as a Service is a system in which the majority of the configuration is done for us, but we still have some admin configuration we have to do to use it. For example, with virtual machines, this is 100% IaaS. A virtual machine you can put whatever operating system on there, but you're responsible for the operating system. You're responsible for the software that goes on it. You as an admin have to manage all that. Okay. With Platform as a Service, virtual machines are set up in the background that you don't have any control over. They've already put the operating system on there. They've already put the software on there. You don't have any control over any of that. But there's still some administration you have to do in order to control it. For example, Microsoft has a directory service called Azure AD. Now, this is a big deal. This is probably one of the biggest deals of the things I've gone over so far in this cloud. Azure Active Directory is what we call a platform as a service. It is a directory service that is sort of the cloud version of what you have here called ADDS. So, now I remember when I first heard about Azure Active Directory, I thought, oh, well, this is just like you're just hosting virtual domain controllers in the cloud. No, they have completely redone the concepts of Active Directory. It is completely redone with all new web-based programming languages. It does not use any of the dated stuff like LDAP and Kerberos and all that. It uses industry standard authentication protocols in order to support all the latest and greatest features and capabilities in the cloud. Okay, and so these are where users, passwords, all of that stuff is going to be managed in the cloud. But it starts out with almost nothing in it. So it's ready to use, but you as an admin have to start creating users and all of that. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, what if I want to use my on-premise users in the cloud? Well, stand by, I'll explain that in a second. Anyway, Azure AD is a platform as a service. So is, here's another one, Exchange Online. Microsoft has Exchange Online. That is actually both a platform as a service and a software as a service, in that the admin side of it is the platform as a service, but the user side is the software as a service. Same thing for SharePoint Online. Microsoft has SharePoint Online as well. Same idea there. All right. And then you've got Microsoft Teams. That's the admin side of that is a platform as a service, but the user side of that is a software as a service. There is OneDrive for Business. That's a cloud storage that we have access to that allows users to store their data out there in the cloud. There is a product called Intune, which is Microsoft's MDM product. MDM, it's also MAM product, so it's both. Mobile device management, that allows us to manage devices. This is one of the most powerful things we have available to us. This is what sort of is replacing the concept of GPOs. This is going to allow us to manage our device settings. Not only can we manage on-premise devices, but we can manage mobile devices. GPOs can only manage devices for Windows. With Intune, we can manage Windows, Android, iOS, iPadOS, macOS, all that stuff. With the help of Intune, we can manage the settings and restrictions. We can deploy software. This is a very, very powerful product, okay, that we have available to us. It even has a thing called Autopilot, which will allow us to reconfigure Windows machines and all of that. So very, very powerful stuff that we have available to us. All right. Now, I will tell you that Azure has, Azure definitely has some of the, it has some platform as a service technologies and some software as a services technologies, but the main type of system that Microsoft has created for platform as a service and software as a service is called Microsoft 365. Okay, Microsoft 365. All right, which I forgot to add to my display here. We actually do have apps that are called the Microsoft 365 apps. All right, which formerly they would call them Office 365 apps. They're now, starting to call them Microsoft 365 apps. But the Microsoft 365 services is a cloud service that basically sits on top of Azure. So you have Azure in the background of all this, and the Microsoft 365 sitting on top of it. All right, you can't have a Microsoft 365 account or tenant that doesn't also have Azure. Azure is in the background no matter what. And the other thing to be aware of is both of these share Azure AD. So you'll notice that there are web portals for creating users and things through Microsoft 365 or creating users through Azure. It all ties back to Azure AD. You're going to see the same users no matter what. So these two things are glued together basically. Okay, they're glued together. Now on Microsoft 365 with PaaS and SaaS and all that, you're not really going to be hosting virtual machines, but you're going to be working with these services. Let's just kind of color code some of this real quick. All right. Now again, I do want to add that Azure does have PaaS and SaaS services that I'm not getting into right now, but it's mainly an IaaS based service. That's its main focus. Microsoft 365 is strictly PaaS related and software as a service, SaaS related. It doesn't really have any virtual machines or any of that, though it can interact with them. Okay, so if I was to sort of draw a circle around some of these, all of this stuff you see here would be Azure related, and then all of this stuff you see right here would be the Microsoft 365 related. Now, they both share Azure AD, so I'm going to put a purple circle around that. Red and blue make purple. All right, and so they all link to that. Okay, and so that is how Microsoft handles those concepts. The other thing about With Azure, you're paying for the CPU, RAM, storage you use. With Microsoft 365, it's all based on licenses. So you purchase these subscriptions that have a certain amount of licenses, and you issue these licenses out to your users, and your users can take advantage of these various features. Okay. One more thing I want to explain here, and that is, what about the issue of what if we want to use our on-premise users to access resources in Azure? Well, Microsoft has a solution for that. They actually have a type of server that you can set up, and the server is called an Azure AD Connect server. Azure AD Connect. Now, what does this do? An Azure AD Connect server, this is a synchronization-based system, and what it will do is it will allow my on-premise users to be synchronized out to Azure AD. Now, it does not allow Azure AD users to be synced in, only out, but it will allow user passwords and all of that to be synced in. So if a user is logging on to Azure AD and they change their password out in the cloud, it does have the ability to synchronize that password back in. But the beauty of this is by going this route, if you have this on-premise environment, you can achieve what we call SSO. What is SSO? Single sign-on. The idea of single sign-on with all of this is my user can sit down at their on-premise computer, they can log on, and it's going to log them on both in the cloud as well, it's going to log them on-premise as well as in the cloud at the same time. All right, and they can access resources out there. The other thing I'll tell you is that Microsoft has moved into a way to where you could technically not even have a domain nowadays. You don't necessarily have to have a domain. In fact, it pains me to say this as a consultant because, I have fed my family for, 2 decades by using Active Directory, both teaching it as well as, consulting on it. But I'll be honest, Microsoft is now moving in a direction to where domains are not even needed anymore. They're now making it possible to where everything can be managed through your cloud service and domains are not needed. But if you're a company that's already got a domain and all this is still in place and all of that, then this Azure AD Connect server is going to be the thing that's going to help you. Okay? All right. Well, hopefully this has now helped you have a better understanding. This was really just a fundamentals video to help you understand the cloud service, the concepts of it, and I hope that this has been helpful to you. I'd now like to spend some time talking about Windows exploit protection. Now, this is a feature that's been around since about 2018. Microsoft started really pushing the Defender security capabilities that Windows supports, and exploit protection is an additional layer of protection that stacks on top of what Defender offers in the Windows environment. This is both supported by the server operating systems as well as your Windows client operating systems. So to get to the exploit protection and make sure that everything's turned on and configured, you can do that by going down to the Start button, click the Settings icon here. Once that loads up, you're going to go to Update and Security, and then from there you take a look at the Windows security area here. We're going to click on that, and then from there we're going to go to App and Browser Control, okay, because exploit protection is involving applications, is going to involve applications as far as managing and securing those. From there you'll see it says exploit protection. It tells you exploit protection is built in. Windows 10 protects also for Windows 11. To protect your device against attacks. It tells you that out of the box your device is already set up with the protection settings that work best for most people. But point being here, we can go in and configure this if we want. So we're going to go to exploit protection settings, and this is where you can turn it on. So you can see the various features that we have that are there to help protect us against various threats, and these are related to the operating system specifically. If you wanted to turn something off, you could. Okay, Maybe there was something that was conflicting with something you were trying to do. Maybe you were developing an application and you needed to disable one of these features because the operating system was preventing something from loading. You could do that. But ultimately, these are, features that are there to help lock things down, help secure things. Now, you can also go over here to where it says Program Settings, and you'll see there's already a list of executables that involve the operating system that they've overridden for specific things involving exploit protection. So you can look at those, you click on those, and you can click Edit, and you can see there's various features here that are there for locking things down as far as different exploits are concerned in the operating system. So they've already overridden, like for example, they've overridden a randomization for images and all of that. This all gets into the fact that hackers love to do things like buffer overflows with memory. They love to inject code into images so that when you open those images, it enables or disables something. You have what's known as a rootkit, which involves trying to do what's called privilege escalation. So there's various types of threats here that hackers are attempting to perform, and of course the point of exploit protection is to lock all those things down so that you don't have to worry about those issues. Of course, in some cases though, your operating system has executables that it needs to run that exploit protection could see as a threat and cause it not to open. And so this is what these overrides are here for. Now, if there was a program, not just a specific operating system service or something, but a specific program that you wanted to override the exploit protection on, you could do that here. You could add that program. So it says add program by name, and then choose exact file path. So you can go either one of those, okay? And it'll point to a sample of the file. Now, one of the neat things about this is, of course, you can probably imagine that, okay, fine, well, maybe I want to configure this for a bunch of servers, or maybe I want to configure this for a bunch of clients, but I don't want to have to sit down one at a time and configure these individually, okay? So the way you can handle that is you can go right here to where it says Export Settings. Once you've configured the settings the way you want, you can go to Export Settings, and you can save this XML file, okay? So I'll just create a little folder here called Exploit Protection, and I'm just going to save this little XML file to that folder. Now what I can do is on my domain controller, I can go to Server Manager, I can go to Tools, I can go to Group Policy Management. All right, and then from there, I can create a GPO, Group Policy Object, right? So go here under my domain, and then down here to Group Policy Objects, and I'm just going to create a GPO called Exploit Protection. All right, and then I'm going to edit that GPO. So I'm going to right-click and click Edit, and then this is going to be under Computer Management. So we're going to go under Computer Management, and then we'll go to Policies. We'll go to Administrative Templates, and then Windows Components. Expand that out, and then let me just move this over a little bit. Scroll down, and we should have right here where it says Windows Defender Exploit Guard. So we're just going to click on that, or expand that, and then go to Exploit Protection, and you have this little policy here where it says use a common set of exploit protection settings. So we're going to double click on that. We're going to go to enable it, and then from there we can specify the path of the XML. Okay, so in my case, the :/exploit protection /settings.xml. Okay, we can double check that path if we want. All right. So we'll go here, so exploit protection, and then settings.xml, right? Of course, file extensions are hidden. I can fix that relatively easy by coming over here and just clicking View, and then telling it to show the extensions. There it is, settings.xml. So we point to that path, and there you go. All right. At that point, you can have those settings imported into everybody's machine. All right. So we'll click OK. Close out of that, and then we would, of course, drag and drop this over wherever we want this to, whatever we want this to affect. If we just wanted it to affect the entire domain, we could just drag and drop it over the entire domain. If we wanted it over a specific OU, like maybe we just wanted it to affect domain controllers, we could drag and drop it over just domain controllers, right? And then don't forget, policies don't take effect immediately in the Windows world. They happen every 90 to 120 minutes, or you can reboot a machine for them to take effect, or you can always go and you can run the GP update command, right? So I can go to here, I can say GP update /force, hit enter, and that of course will refresh the policies. Remember, on domain controllers though, they do get refreshed every 5 minutes, whereas everybody else machines get refreshed every 90 to 120 minutes. If you want to verify that a GPO has actually taken effect, you can always run the GP results /h:/report.html. All right, and that'll just generate a little report that you can view through your web browser. Go here to the C drive, and we can open up this little report. And this would allow us to verify that the GPO has actually taken effect, right? So we'll go here, show all, scroll down, and we can see if our GPO has taken effect. There it is. Exploit protection is enabled, so it did take effect, all right? And that is how you configure exploit protection on a large scale, as well as if you wanted to configure it on a single computer basis, all right? And there are PowerShell commands that you can also use for exploit protection as well. So if you wanted to try to script it out, you can use there are PowerShell commands that you can look at that will actually do that for you. I'd like to go over the concept now of WDAC, also known as Windows Defender Application Control. Now, application control is not really a new concept. For many years we have needed that capability of controlling what applications a user can open on their machine, and servers are no different. So you want to think about this from a client standpoint, but in this case we also want to think about it from a server standpoint. We have different admins that are working with our servers, and admins make mistakes too. In some cases they'll run stuff that we shouldn't be running on a server. I had a client even install a finance piece of software on a server that really shouldn't have been installed, and it ended up opening up a back door, and hackers were able to connect in and do ransomware. That's a good example of what I'm saying here. So we do need to be able to police what can be installed on a server. So I want to show you a couple things here. First off, we're on NYCDC1 on my example here, and if I open up my web browser and just go to Google or Bing and just search for the keywords, let's see, configure Microsoft Defender Application Control. If you search any of those keywords, you should be able to locate actually, let me change the keywords. Let's do WDAC versus AppLocker. That's actually better keywords. So let's search those keywords. There is a nice little article right here, WDAC and AppLocker overview. So we're going to click on that. And again, my goal here is to show you how you can find these same types of documents in the real world. When you're looking for stuff, this comes in handy to look at the official documentation. Because one of the things that people get confused on is the difference between Windows Defender Application Control versus AppLocker. Okay, AppLocker has been around for years, ever since Windows 7 came out. And so there is a little confusion on, when should we use one or the other. Actually, the two can work together, all right? But if you look here, it tells you in Windows Defender Application Control, the rules that you can define with it will control things like the attributes of code signing certificates used to sign app and binary, so you can choose to allow something to be ran if it's digitally signed. You can even have rules that can be applied based on the reputation of an app. Microsoft has what's called the Intelligent Security Graph, and they can make decisions on whether or not a app is trustworthy, and that can go into a database, of course, that can link to all this. You then have certain paths where files are located on whether or not they can be ran based on where they're located at. Okay, and and then also the process that launches the app, or the binary program that's being ran here. Okay, so those are some of the things to think about. Of course, the confusing thing here is when to use one or the other. Again, we've had App Locker since Windows 7 came out, and of course the Windows Defender Application Control Guard scenario is a little bit newer, right? So if you look here with App Locker, you can still use App Locker. This is still available. They tell you that you can create rules based on code signing certificates. You can choose specific binary files themselves, executables, whatever they are, and then also the paths that can be allowed. All right. But if you go down here, there's a great piece of information. Choose when to use WDAC or App Locker. So they tell you here, in some cases, App Locker may be more appropriate technology for your organization. App Locker's best win. Well, first off, the rule of thumb is this, okay? WDAC is great for sending out a overall blanket of policies of things maybe you definitely don't want to allow, or you definitely do want to allow. And then App Locker is more fine-grained, all right? So in other words, when you want to be a little bit more specific, that's when it's good to use App Locker and to kind of mix App Locker with these. So, for example, I might create a policy, a GPO group policy object that deploys the Windows Defender Application Control policy out that says, hey, allow this or don't allow this, okay, for everyone, for the entire domain, or maybe just for all of my servers, or maybe just all of my clients. And then with App Locker, I'll deploy an App Locker policy that denies specific things. For example, there might be the sales department. I want to deny, or I want to allow specific applications just for the sales department. Okay, and that's when App Locker is going to be really, really good. All right. So they tell you here, you could use App Locker's best when you have a mixed Windows operating system environment, need to apply the same policy controls to Windows 10, earlier operating systems. You need to apply different policies for different users or groups. So that's where I was going with that. And then you don't want to enforce application on application files such as DLLs or drivers. All right. So best practice, you should enforce WDAC at the most restrictive level possible for your organization, and then use App Locker for the fine-tune the restrictions. And that's what you want to remember. All right, that's sort of the key. That's the general key on using both. All right, so let's jump in now and take a look at how we can implement this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to my Windows 11 virtual machine, because I'm going to be installing a thing called the WDAC Profile Policy Wizard, and that you can't install that on server directly, so we need our client operating system for this. So I'm going to open up my web browser on my Windows 11 box here. We'll just do a quick search for WDAC Policy Wizard, okay? And we're going to look for this link right here. It says webapp-wdaq wizard azurewebsites.net. I'm going to go ahead and click on that now. And then from there, we're going to click to download the installer. So it's going to go ahead and download that. And then, of course, once that's done downloading, we're going to go ahead and open up the file. All right. And then from there, it says, all right, publisher, there it is, launch when ready. That's fine. We can do update if it needs to be updated. So we'll go ahead and let that run through real quick. Okay, once that's done updating, I'm going to go to Policy Creator here. And then it asks me if I'm creating a multiple policy format, create a base or a supplemental policy for Windows 10 version 1903 and above, up to 32-bit. Keep in mind this tool is ever changing, so depending upon when you're watching this video, it may look a little different, but it's an ongoing battle with me updating my videos, because I can update them week after week, but they still change things week after week. But anyway, you'll see that right here. And then you've also got single policy format, create a WDAC policy to be deployed on any Windows 11 device, including Server 2016, 2019. And they've got, if you do a multiple policy, they got the base policy. We'll just do a single policy format. And so we'll go there, we'll click next. And then it says, all right, are you doing the default Windows mode? Default Windows mode authorizes Windows operating system components, store applications, Office 365, OneDrive, Teams. Then you've got allow Microsoft mode authorizes Windows operating system, store, Office 365, OneDrive, the WHQL signed kernel drivers, all Microsoft signed out applications, or you can do sign and reputable mode authorizations, which is Windows operating systems, store applications, Office 365, OneDrive, Teams, signed kernel drivers, all that fun stuff. All right. So I'm going to go with this first one right here. And it says, okay, so it's going to create me a policy based on that using this policy template. All right. I'm just going to call this my template demo. All right. That'll be the policy name. And then the file name, which is asking me, like, where do I want to store this file? And by default, you'll see it's going to want to store it right there in, it's going to want to store it in the documents folder. But I'm actually going to just go down here to the C drive, and I'm just going to create a folder called WDAC, and I'm going to call this my policy demo.xml. So we'll hit save. And we're going to go ahead and click next. All right. So from there, we have the ability to turn on and off these various things. All right. So advanced boot options, allow supplemental policies, and you can always click learn more, and you can, if there's any individual ones here you want to look at specifically. But if I want to turn certain things on or off, I can do that. Then it says, do you want to run this policy in audit mode? Turning on audit mode will not enforce the policy. We recommend first running audit for prior to enforcement. This is just going to log it. But I'm actually going to turn audit mode. I'm going to turn audit mode off here. Okay. So then we'll click next. And it says, all right, here is the list of signing rules it's going to go ahead and put in there. So all of these different things here are going to be allowed currently. And I'm going to click next. All right. And then I'm just waiting on that to finish loading. There it goes, building the WDAC policy. All right, now obviously you can get really, really customizable and all that. We don't have to get that deep here. That's not what you really need to know here. You need to know what this is, and you know what the policy is and all that, but we don't have to get so deep into building customization into it. So from there, it's generated an output file, and there is my output file right there, this sipolicy.p7b. Now let's see how we can apply this little policy here. So we're going to go right-click the Start button and go Windows Terminal as an admin. All right, and I'm just going to open up the integrated scripting environment for PowerShell, just to kind of show you what the script would be if you just wanted to apply this to this machine right out of the gates here. So here we are, and I'm going to type this command, convert from C-CI policy -XML path, and then the path will be the C:/WDAC /SI. Oops, hang on, not the SI. There we go. The my policy demo. Okay, so that's our XML file. All right. And then we'll say dash binary file path, and that'll be C:/WDAC /the SI policy. Okay, so that is going to apply that. So we're going to go ahead and just run that. All right, and it says it's been applied. Now, that's how we would just apply that to the this one machine if we wanted to. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the policy over to a domain controller and show you how we could apply this to our servers and our domain and all of that. All right, so I can go over here to my file explorer, and we'll go to the C drive and WDAC, and there is our file right there, this SI policy. So we're just gonna copy that. All right, so make a copy of it, right? And then I'm gonna go //nycdc1 /C$. All right, and so from there, I'm just going to create a folder on the C drive called WDAC, and I'm going to paste it on our domain controller. Okay, so we'll just paste that over. and then we'll just verify that it's there. There it is right there. Okay, and now we're going to jump over to our domain controller. Okay, so here we are on our domain controller, NYCDC1. We'll go to File Explorer, go to our C drive, and there's that WDAC folder right there. There's the policy. Just going to right-click that and go to Properties, and I'm going to go to Sharing and Advanced Sharing. We'll say Share this folder. All right, permissions, everyone has read. Okay. From there, we're going to go to Server Manager. We're going to go to the Tools menu, and we're going to open up the Group Policy Object Editor, okay, or Group Policy Management, which is going to let us get into Group Policy Object Editor. All right, I already have a WDAC GPO that I'd created earlier. I'm going to get rid of that though and create a new one for this video. So we'll just call this WDAC Deployment. Of course, you could name it anything you want, and then we're going to go ahead and right-click and edit that. Now we'll go right here under Computer Configuration, expand out Policies, Administrative Templates, and then go to System, and you will see Device Guard right there. And then there is a policy called Deploy Windows Defender Application Control. So we're going to double-click on that. We're going to click Enable, and this is where we put the path in, which is going to be the // NYCDC1/WDAC/, and if you look, let's go back to the file, verify the name of it, SI policy P7B, right? So let's just copy that name. All right, and we will paste that in. So there it is. All right, now we'll click OK. All right, and at that point we have attached that to the domain. So the only thing that has to really happen now is any computer that's going to receive the policy, they just have to refresh their policies, which of course can take up to 90 to 120 minutes. Of course, you can also run the GP update /force and all of that, and it'll obviously happen a lot quicker. Of course, domain controllers do refresh their policies every 5 minutes, so domain controllers get their policies refreshed quicker. But other machines, it's 90 to 120 minutes, all right? And so that is how we can apply these application control policies out to the domain. Now, just as a side note, extra credit, if you will, if we edit this and we go under Policies and we go under Windows Settings and then go Security Settings, scroll down a little bit, and we have Application Control Policies. This is where AppLocker lives. I'm not getting into this thoroughly in this video, but this is where you could create AppLocker rules if you wanted to, executable rules, Windows install rules, so you can be a little bit more fine-grained about what you're applying there. Okay, but hopefully now that helps you understand the idea of creating a custom WDAC policy and how we can apply it not just to one computer, but to all the computers in our domain, including our servers. One last thing I want to mention on this, it's fine if you want to try it out and then try downloading some software and running it like some exe files or something on the machine, but I do recommend that you remove it because some of the activities that we may be doing during the course, you could end up stopping yourself from being able to install certain things. So I would actually recommend just getting rid of this after you play around. If you want to play around with it, fine. If you don't, that's fine too. But if you do want to play around with it after you're done playing around with downloading files and running them and stuff like that, after the policies have refreshed and seeing if you can run them, then I would delete it if I were you. So that's my recommendation. Now let's talk about setting up Defender for Endpoint. If I go here to Google real quick and I just do a search for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft has information about their Defender for Endpoint. Here is the Learn article about that. And they basically tell you that Defender for Endpoint is going to allow you in the cloud to control your endpoints, your Windows-based machines, and from there, your Windows-based machines can act as behavioral sensors detecting things that are threats on your network. They can report to cloud security analytics to your Windows Defender dashboard in Microsoft 365 services. They also provide threat intelligence where they can download the latest and greatest threat information and report that back to you
on the Windows Defender dashboard or Microsoft Defender dashboard. So you get a lot of capabilities and features with this. However, you don't just get the Defender for Endpoint capability with Microsoft 365 and Azure services right out of the gate. You have to activate it. So I want to show you how to do that. I'm going to go to portal.microsoft.com. We'll just kind of start there. All right, and we'll click Show All, and we'll drop down right here where it says Billing, and we're going to go here where it says Your Products. All right, so if we click on Your Products, you can see the licenses that you have available in your environment. Right now I've got Enterprise Mobility Plus Security E5, I've got Microsoft 365 E5. Those are the current subscriptions that I have. Now if I go back over here, if I go to Purchase Services, all right, it shows all the different products, and I'm just going to do a search for the word Endpoint. All right, and if I scroll down here, you'll see Security and Identity, and here it is, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and I'm going to go with this Premium 2 trial here, click Details on it, and I can start a free trial. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and start a free trial right now. Okay, it's going to bring me to another portal. Okay, I just hit Try Now, and it's going to activate a free trial currently for 3 months. Now keep in mind they do change this periodically, so the time amount that they give you could be different depending upon when you are doing this. All right, it says your confirmation number. All right, use your new license. Make sure you assign them to your user, so I'll just hit Continue. All right. And if I click on my users, active users, we'll scroll down, and John Christopher. Doesn't matter if you don't have the same users as me, by the way. Licenses and apps. There it is, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So we're going to go ahead and hit Save Changes. Now, you might have to give this a little bit of time before it is going to be fully functional. All right, now just to confirm, I did pause the recording after I did that, and I want you to know that it took about 3 hours before this finally took effect for me. I'm not really used to it taking that long, so I don't know if today was just an off day for the services. Sometimes when you have trial tenants and things take longer, but it did take about 3 hours. So how do I know that this is officially ready to go and turned on? I should be able to go to portal just click Show All, and then click on Security, and that'll bring you into the Defender dashboard. All right, and you can look right here, and you should have an area called Endpoints. That will not show up until this is installed. And again, it took about 3 hours. So just be advised, that's how long it took me. It normally, I don't think it takes that long, but it did for me today. So you might just have to be patient and come back and do this a little bit later. But now play around with this a little bit later. But as you can see, it is officially turned on, and this is how I know it's turned on, because I have an area here called Endpoints located in the security.microsoft.com, which is the Microsoft 365 Defender dashboard. All right, now if I want to onboard a server into Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, the first thing I need to do is open up my web browser, and I'm going to go to security.microsoft.com. That brings me into the Microsoft 365 Defender dashboard, and I'm going to scroll down here and go to the Settings blade. All right, once I get to the Settings blade, I'm going to click on Endpoints. All right, and the next thing I'm going to do is, basically what we have to do is we have to download a script that is going to import this to the Defender for Endpoint. So we're going to scroll down and go to Onboarding. All right, and we're going to choose the operating system. In my case, I'm running Server 2022, so I'm going to choose this one. And then I'm going to scroll down, and I have an option for downloading the onboarding package here. All right, so we're just going to click on that and just waiting on that to officially get downloaded. All right, once it's done downloading, I'm going to open up this little zip file. All right, and then I am just going to extract this little script, and I'll just save this to my C drive. Okay, I'm going to say Windows or Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, MDFE. We'll just paste it in there. Alright, so the script is officially available, and if we right click Start, we're going to go to Windows PowerShell Admin. Actually, you know what, I'm going to just open it up through Command Prompt as an admin. So right click, Run as Administrator, and then we will cd /, and then we'll go into the MDFE folder, dir, and there is the script file right there. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and run this script. So I just hit W and hit Tab. Alright, and it says, alright, you're going to run the script to onboard in Defender for Endpoint. Tells you it can take 5 to 30 minutes. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit yes on that. It's starting the service. Now, also, while this is running, something else that to keep in mind, you do have to have the Defender antivirus installed on this machine. So if you do get an error, it may be because you don't have the Defender antivirus, and you should have that automatically. So it would be a situation where maybe your company has disabled it for some reason or something like that. But if I go into Server Manager, we'll load up. I just hit Start and went to Server Manager. And I'm just loading up Server Manager here. We're just going to verify that we do have that Defender antivirus. So here we are, just letting this little blue bar quit spinning. And once that's done spinning, we can go up here to Manage, and then we're going to go to Add Roles and Features. Okay, we're just waiting on that to get done. Alright, so here it is, Add Roles and Features. Next, 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 and we're going to move past the server role screen onto the feature screen. We're going to scroll down. I passed it. There it is. Microsoft Defender for Antivirus. We got to make sure that is installed. And if that's not installed, you got to make sure that's installed, because that will cause this to quit being onboarded. All right. Looks like it went through successfully. It says press any key, so everything's good to go. We now officially have Microsoft Defender for Endpoint on board. I should say we now have this server, which is NYC Server 1, onboarded into Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Now, it shouldn't take long, but I should now be able to open up my web browser here and come back over here and go to Devices, and it should show under Assets Devices, I should say, it should show the server is now officially onboarded, which it is, okay? And it may take a little bit of time to show the correct domain and stuff like that on there. I do notice that sometimes it can be a little bit out of date on some of the stuff that it shows. But now that we've done that, we now have the ability to do things like vulnerability management. We can look at vulnerabilities on the machine, look at weaknesses and all that maybe shows up. We can do remediations. Not going to get into all the details on that right now, but now that we've got it onboarded, we have all these capabilities available to us as far as managing that machine. Let's talk about Defender Credential Guard now. Defender Credential Guard is a feature that is available to be deployed out to our services so that it can protect our credentials from being compromised in a situation where a hacker was to get like physical access to a machine. Imagine if a hacker gets physical access to a machine, they could potentially reboot that computer into something like Kali Linux, and then from there they could reset, say, an admin password or something and log on as that admin, right? So that's a little scary when you think about it. And I've done this before. I've actually done that. I've had to do that to reset an admin password on a machine. And there's two main ways you could solve the problem. One would be to use BitLocker to encrypt the hard drive, but the other, of course, would be Credential Guard. Credential Guard virtualizes. It uses a hypervisor-based type system to create what's called a little virtual sandbox for where all the credentials are stored on the machine. And then what it does is it encrypts that little virtual sandbox. And it'll prevent anybody from being able to go in and mess with it. All right. So let me show you where this is at first off. So we're going to do this through a group policy. Here we are on NYC-DC1. I'm going to open up Server Manager, go to Tools, and then go to Group Policy Management. Okay. From there, we would go here and we could just create a GPO. Okay, I'll just call it Credential Guard. All right, for lack of a better name. And then I'm just going to edit that GPO that I created. I'm going to go under Computer Config Policies, Administrative Templates, and then I'm going to go under System. All right, and from there we're going to go here to Device Guard. Okay, and then from there you'll see you have Turn On Virtualization Based Security. So we'll double click on that and we're going to click to turn that on. All right, and so from there you're going to have a few different options here. Select the platform security level. It's going to support secure boot and DMA protection if your computer also supports the direct memory access protection. Okay. If you just wanted secure boot because maybe there was going to be a conflict with the DMA or something, you could just do secure boot. Virtualization based protection of code integrity. So that's currently not configured, so it wouldn't turn it on. You can enable it with UEFI lock. You need to actually look at the type of firmware you've got, the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface you have. And remember, that's what's replaced BIOS over the years. Is BIOS has been replaced by UEFI. Of course, if you don't support, you're dealing with an old computer that just supports BIOS and it doesn't support UEFI, you're not going to be able to support this feature anyway. Okay, but you can enable that. Virtualization-based protection of code integrity. So enable with UEFI lock. Okay, and they tell you this right here. This setting enables virtualization-based protection of the kernel mode integrity. When enabled, kernel mode memory protections are enforced and kernel mode validation path is protected. Okay, so everything is going to be, that's all going to be encrypted. Now, what we really care about here, what we're talking about, is this right here. So even if you don't quite understand all of that right now, this is what we care about. So we want to say yes. We want to turn this on. All right. And if our operating system, if our computer does support UEFI lock, we can do that. And it tells you right here, if you do that, this option is going to ensure that virtualization-based protection of code integrity cannot be disabled remotely. So there's no way somebody could send some kind of command or something to your firmware to disable it. In order to disable the feature, you must set the group policy disabled, as well as remove the security function from each computer with a physical present user. Okay, so that means you physically would have to be there, right? So that's the idea there. Okay, the main thing that you need to know right now in going through this and learning this is that it's this policy right here. Turn on virtualization-based security. The thing that you could try to, that you could be fooled by is the fact that there's not necessarily a policy that's just called Credential Guard. You actually have to go to Computer Config, Policies, Administrative Templates, System, Device Guard, double-click this. This is the policy, and this is where the magic happens. That's where you got to turn. That's where it's got to be turned on. Okay, so just keep that in mind. In order for that to work, you gotta select that. All right, and you also have this last option, secure launch configurations. Says you this setting sets the configuration of secure launch to secure a boot chain. That's protecting the sequence of booting that's happening on a computer. So you could turn that on as well. Again, your firmware of your computer has to support this, and a lot of computers nowadays do, but that's how you would turn it on. So at that point, I would click OK, and then I could just attach this GPO to wherever I want. I'm just going to apply this at whichever level I want to apply it to, and that's how you can implement Credential Guard. One of the nice little features that we've had in our operating systems for quite a while now is the SmartScreen filtering capabilities that Microsoft has introduced. Now, they introduced this back when Internet Explorer was the main web browser, but of course we have Edge now. And SmartScreen filtering is a great feature because it communicates with the Microsoft Threat Intelligence database to find out if a website has been reported as being like a phishing website. So this is a feature we can turn on not only on our client machines, but we can also turn it on our servers. And the way we're going to do that is through a GPO, through a group policy object. So let's take a look at real quick how we could do that. Here we are on our NYC-DC1 machine and Server Manager. We'll go into that, go to Tools, and then open up Group Policy Management. Once you're in Group Policy Management, you can create a GPO. I'm just going to call it Enable SmartScreen. Okay, again, obviously you can name it anything you want. And then I'm just going to edit that. And we're going to go underneath Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates. and then Windows components. And then from there, we'll scroll down, and let's see, we will open up, here it is right here, Windows Defender SmartScreen. Of course, they have it for Internet Explorer, but we're going to turn it on Edge. So we'll go right here, configure Windows Defender SmartScreen, and we'll enable that. It tells you that this policy is going to let you configure whether to turn this on or off. Windows Defender SmartScreen provides warning messages to help people protect employees from potentially phishing scams and all that. So it tells you a little bit about it. And then if we want to prevent the bypassing of it so users cannot bypass it, we'll turn that on as well. And then at that point, all we have to do is just attach it to the domain if we want it to go out to everybody in the domain, or if we wanted it to just be a certain group of people. We could do this based on an organizational unit. Like, for example, I have workstations. But in my case, if I wanted to go out to my servers as well, that's where I would want to put it. And of course, again, don't forget, always remember that policies take effect every 90 to 120 minutes, unless it's a domain controller. It's 5 minutes. Of course, you can also run GP update /force to force that to happen immediately. Now, when it comes to operating system security in regards to group policy objects, there are hundreds of policies that can help lock down your operating system, and you obviously will have to become familiar with certain things you're wanting to do and look up specific policies that will do what it is you're wanting to do. Okay, so again, if I'm wanting to let's say I want to disable certain types of encryptions or certain types of authentications, there's going to be policies for that. I got to look up exactly how to do that. Now I'm going to show you kind of where in the vicinity all of that stuff is going to, or a lot of that stuff is going to be found inside of a GPO. Okay, you should already be familiar with GPOs by now, based on previous material that you hopefully have looked at. But I want to show you where this is going to be located at. So here we are on our NYC DC1 server. If we open up Server Manager, which we can get to by hitting Start and going to Server Manager, we can go to Tools and then open up Group Policy Management. Okay, that's right here. And then at that point, I could go under my domain. Here's Group Policy Objects. I could create a new GPO, just call it Operating System, I'll just say OS Security. And again, don't worry if you don't have the same GPOs as me. I'm just going to right click the OS Security GPO. I'm going to click Edit. All right, and then what you're going to find is the majority of the security settings for locking things down on your server would be under Computer Configuration, Policies, Windows Settings, and then Security Settings. All right, and then from there, the first place I kind of recommend starting would be under Local Policy and then go to Security Options. So there are a lot of policies here that can lock down an operating system. From things like, blocking certain Microsoft accounts, allowing or denying guests, renaming the administrator account so you don't have an admin account called administrator. Lots and lots of stuff here, though. Restricting CD-ROM. You can alter the LDAP settings here. You can stop people from looking at the time, and they are managing the clock settings or time settings on a machine. So many different things. You could restrict NTLM, the old New Technology LAN Manager protocol, from being used. You can manage user account control settings, which is the pop-up thing that people get on their machines that require escalation to admin rights. So there's lots and lots of stuff here. All you got to do is double click on these, and you can also look at the Explain tab, and they'll give you information about this. So the big thing you got to do as an admin is decide, well, here, what are the things I want to do? What am I needing to lock down? And you might have to do a little searching, a little Google searching, but you might be able to find probably a policy that'll do what you want to do. The problem is there's over 4,000 something policies here. So that's why I say you kind of need to figure out what it is you're trying to accomplish. Do a little searching, and there's probably a policy that'll do what it is you want to do. Okay. For example, another thing would be like if I wanted to do restricted groups, I could restrict exactly what groups a user can be a member of. This way, if you've got other admins that keep adding people to groups or removing people out of groups, you can restrict it to where Certain people have to be part of certain groups, or certain people can't be part of a certain group. You can also control what settings or services are starting up on people's machines or on your server. Registry settings, you can add registry settings here. So there's loads and loads of things that you can do. You can enable auditing to monitor your server. And then what you would probably want to do when you configured all that, you might have an organizational unit called servers or something. You would drag this over and put it over the servers OU. Again, I can do that very easily just by going into Active Directory users and computers, and then I could create myself an OU, right? So I could say new, and I'll just create an organizational unit called servers. Okay, and right now my NYC server 1, I'm drag and drop it into that. My domain controller, I'm just going to keep my domain controller, NYCDC1 is just going to stay in that OU, but my servers will stay in the servers OU here. And so from there, if I wanted to, let me just refresh here and see if it appears. It doesn't look like it's going to appear. There it goes. It did appear. So then if I come over here and I had implemented my policy, I could just drag and drop it over that. At that point, you have 90 to 120 minutes for it to take effect, or you could always jump over to the server and run the gp update /force command to have it forced immediately, right? So that's the thing. There are thousands of policies. You kind of have to decide, well, what is it I want to do? Look up how to do it, and then you could implement it in the GPO. And that would be how we could apply that GPO to restrict operating system settings. Now, when it comes to managing your password requirements inside of ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, that is going to be done by group policies, all right? And you're going to do that on a domain controller, and the domain controller is going to have a tool that is going to let you go in and edit your group policy objects, and you're going to set your password requirements based on that, okay? So first order of business, of course, is to figure out what your password requirements are, involving maybe you want 10-character passwords. You want to make the users reset their password every 30 days. You want to make it where users can't reuse the same passwords. You want to have complex passwords, uppercase, lowercase numbers, and symbols. You need to figure all that out. And then what you're going to do, you're going to sit down at a domain controller, such as this server here, NYCDC1. I'm going to go to Start, and then I'm going to go to Server Manager. And then once Server Manager finishes loading up, we can go to the Group Policy Management Console tool. So we're going to go to the Tools menu and open up Group Policy Management Console. And from there, your passwords are configured inside of a GPO called the default domain policy. Now, you may not have all these other policies that I've got here. Don't worry about those. The only one that would matter right now, the one we're talking about, is the one called default domain policy. The default domain policy is the GPO that the group policy object, which is the object that's going to be deployed out to all of your machines, that's going to allow you to control your policy. Okay, so you're going to right-click that, you're going to click Edit, and then from there you can go underneath Computer Configuration, Policies, Windows Settings, and then Security Settings, and then Account Policies, and then here we are, Password Policies. Okay, so password policies are set here. You have the following policies. You have enforced password history. This makes it where the passwords, a user can't reuse the same password over and over and over again. In fact, in this case, it's defaulted to 24 passwords, so a user would basically have to cycle through their password 24 times before they can reuse one. You got maximum password age. That's defaulted to 42 days. That's the maximum amount of days they can keep a password before they have to change it. Then you have the minimum password age. That's the minimum amount of days that they have to keep a password before they can change it. That's set to 1 day by default. You have minimum password length, which is 7 characters by default. So they have to have a 7-character password. You've also got minimum password length audit. So this is going to enable auditing for passwords. If you go here, this is kind of a newer policy. That's why I kind of wanted to illustrate. This is the policy that hadn't been around. There's a couple of policies that haven't been around since the early days, and this is one of them. So if you look here, minimum password length audit, it says the security setting determines the minimum password length, which password length audit warning. So they're getting a warning message, okay? And you can set it to a maximum of 128, all right?
And so this is just a warning message that tells you that you should only enable and configure this setting when trying to determine the potential impact of increasing the minimum password length setting. They tell you if it's not defined, then basically the events aren't going to be audited. Okay. If it's defined and is less than or equal to the minimum password length, the audit events will also not be issued. Okay, so that's what that's going to do. It's going to enable the auditing feature. Below that, you've got password must meet complexity requirements. Complexity requirements require you to have an uppercase, lowercase, number, and symbol. You have to have at least 3 of those 4 combinations. Uppercase characters, lowercase characters, numbers, symbols. You have to have at least 3 of those 4 things. A couple other, this next policy here is also a new one, relax minimum password length limits. So you'll notice that if you try to turn that on here, you've got modify the setting, may affect compatibility with client services. And if you click on this little link here that they give you, it's going to take you to this little article. And the article is going to talk a little bit about this and that this is a relatively new feature. And they also tell you that it's only supported essentially by the Windows 10 and higher operating systems. Okay, and so basically what you're going to get here with the password length auditing and enforcement is you're setting this policy is going to have to do back with this policy here. All right, and you're going to set a minimum password length audit. Right here, we talked about that, and then if you enable the relaxed minimum password length here, they tell you that the setting is going to basically control a minimum password setting. You can basically go between, you can go beyond the legacy limit, which was 14. All right. Also, they tell you that this is not defined, then the minimum password length may be configured to a maximum of 14. And they tell you if the setting is defined and disabled, the minimum password length may be configured to a maximum of 14. And if the setting is defined as enabled, then the minimum password is going to be set to, or minimum password length is going to be configured to 14. All right. And so these are just a couple of the newer things that were introduced to Active Directory just a few years ago. All right. Lastly, you have store password using reversible encryption. This is an old policy. It's been around since the year 2000. And it was really important when Windows 2000 came out because in those days we still had some legacy computers running DOS and things like that. And they could not authenticate using the level of encryption. They basically could not store their passwords encrypted on their machines in DOS. So you had to enable this feature, store passwords using reversible encryption, and it meant that the password would not be encrypted on their machine. Keep in mind, turning this on is a security risk. It's not something you should pretty much ever turn on nowadays. God forbid you've still got some, DOS computers in your environment. But if you did turn this on, even if you turn it on, you still have to go to individual users and turn it on there as well. In other words, I'd have to go into Active Directory users' computers, for example, and I would have to open up the specific user that I'm wanting to do this with. So, for example, I had a user named Joe Franson. I'd have to go to Joe Franson account, and I'd have to turn it on here as well for that person. So don't worry, if you were to turn this on, it's not going to completely screw your whole domain over by turning this on. You have to go to each individual user and turn it on there as well. Whichever user was perhaps using that legacy computer or whatever. Over here you've got account lockout policy. So the account lockout policy involves when an account would be locked out after a certain number of attempts. So you have the account lockout threshold. That would be the number of attempts that they get before they get locked out. And then if you set the account lockout duration, that's the amount of time they would be locked out. So if I set this to 30 minutes, then if let's say we set the lockout threshold to 3 and then the lockout duration to 30 minutes, then after 3 bad attempts, putting their password in, they'd be locked out for 30 minutes. You've also got the reset account lockout counter after. That is a timer that resets the strikes. So the threshold is the amount of strikes. If you set it to 3, let's say you set the lockout counter after to 5 minutes. So a person put their password in wrong once, this counter would begin ticking away. And then they put another password in, another bad password in, that's 2. They'd have 2 strikes. Okay, well let's say the 5-minute counter ran out before the 3rd strike was put in, it would reset the strike. So they could put in 2 more bad passwords before it would ever lock them out if they put in the 3rd. Okay, so that's what all that has to do with. Okay. And so this is your domain password policy. Keep in mind that you can only have one of those active at a time. You'll notice that this is attached to the domain, and essentially at that domain level, if you click on it, you can click on this group policy inheritance here, and you can see whatever top GPOs are based. If there's ever a conflict, whatever top GPO that's at the top is the one you would get. Now, ignore the enforced thing right now. We're not getting into what that is, but you would want to make sure that. And again, you may not have all of these GPOs that I've got. The only one that matters here is this one. But if you had multiple GPOs linked to your domain, the top one is the one that the password policies will come out of. Okay, always. Of course, there is a way if you wanted to apply GPOs to password policies to individual groups. You can do group-based passwords as well. And that is known as what's called fine-grained password policies. You can do that by going into Server Manager, Tools, opening up the Active Directory Administrative Center. All right. And this is where you're going to set that. So you're not going to set it through GPO's group policy objects. You're going to set it through this tool. And so if you go down here, and there's a little folder here called System. All right, and then there is this thing called Password Settings Container. You can go into there and you can click New Password Settings, and you can create password settings just for specific groups if you want. So if you do that, if you applied, like let's say I wanted instead of 7 characters for salespeople, I want to use 12 characters for salespeople. I could create a password settings object here and set the number to 12, and then I could apply it to the sales group right here. Okay, and so that's how that would work. So it is possible to apply password policies directly to a group. By default, the password policies are going to go to the whole entire domain through that group policy that I showed you. But if you wanted to do individual groups, you can. They call that fine-grained password policies. Okay, and so those are the different ways that you're going to apply policies in your domain. Keep in mind, if you're in a hybrid environment where you've got an on-premise domain and it's connected to Azure AD and all of that, Microsoft 365 services, you can set password requirements in the cloud as well. However, they don't take effect for hybrid users. So if you're synchronizing on-premise users out to the cloud, you're still going to need to set your password policies for those users on-premise. You're not going to configure those through the cloud. You're going to configure those on-premise exactly the way I just showed you.
Now, one of the things that we can do in an Azure environment, if we've set up a hybrid connection using Azure AD Connect with our on-premise domain and Azure AD, is we can actually set up a list of banned passwords. So I want to show you how to do that. Here we are on portal.azure.com. We're going to click the menu button. We're going to go to Azure AD, Azure Active Directory. Okay, once we get into Azure and Active Directory, we're going to scroll down on the left here, and we're going to take a look where it says Security. So there's a blade called Security. We're going to click on that Security blade, all right, and then we're going to click on Authentication Methods. Okay, once we're on Authentication Methods, there is a blade called Password Protection, and this is the blade that we're looking for here. So if you look right here, we have custom banned passwords. Now there is a custom smart lockout. This is going to be for our Azure AD users. All right. But if you look down here, it says password protection for Windows Server Active Directory. Enable password protection on Windows servers. And if you look at the information, it says if you set yes, password protection is turned on for Active Directory domain controllers when the appropriate agent is installed. All right, so if we click on Learn More right there, let's pull that up. It's going to pull up. Okay, plan and deploy on-premise Azure Active Directory password protection. All right, and let's scroll down here. All right, so it says Azure Active Directory password protection domain controller agent. So you can apply this DC agent machines where the Azure AD protection, password protection agent DC software will be installed. Can run. Basically, these are the requirements that you've got. All right. And so essentially I can install this password protection agent and it will connect my on-premise with the Azure AD smart lockout capabilities. All right. So I can go right here. It says there are the 2 required installers for on-premise Azure AD password protection deployment. You have Azure AD password protection DC agent and then a proxy. Okay. Now the proxy can actually sit in a demilitarized zone if you want. All right, so if your company is using a DMZ, then you could set that up. All right. So from there, Azure AD protection for Windows Server Active Directory, I can click download, and we'll download the password protection agent setup file here. Go ahead and click next. All right. So it's in the process of downloading that. All right, so just waiting on that to get done. Now I'm going to open that file. I'm going to go ahead and install it. So here it is right here, install. Installing Azure AD Password Protection Agent. All right. It says, all right, you must restart your system for the agent to take effect. Okay, so I would restart. But what I want to talk about, let's go back. What I want to look at here with you is password protection for Windows Server Active Directory. If this password protection is enabled, that's turned on. Mode, it says if set to enforced, users will be prevented from setting banned passwords. Okay, so right now this is set to audit. What I can do is I can enforce this list. I can go out and I can get a list of the top most common passwords. So try this if you have a moment. Go to somewhere like Google or Bing and just like Google the top 10,000 most common passwords. And you can get a list of the top, thousands of passwords, and you can copy and paste that in here. And then at that point, it will prevent users both in the cloud as well as on premise from using those passwords. And that is what this is going to do for you. That's this agent that you installed out there now on that server in an Active Directory is going to prevent users from using passwords that you've banned using this capability right here. All right. Now, one other thing here, this custom smart lockout, that is for your Azure AD devices. Your domain policies are still going to override these right here when it comes to synced accounts. So really the only thing that matters right here is the banned password list. That's what that agent's going to take care of for you. So that's how you would connect all that together and make those banned passwords work. I now want to talk about a feature that we have in our on-premise Active Directory that a lot of people have never heard of before. It's called the Protected Users Group. And by putting users in this group, like admins, it's going to add an additional layer of protection to prevent the user's passwords and things like that from being exposed. First, I want to just kind of dive into what Microsoft says about it, because that ultimately is what matters here. And if we pull up our web browser and do a quick search on Active Directory Protected Users Group, all right, there is a nice little article that explains this. And again, I'm just searching for it so that you can, if you ever want to find it yourself, you can find it yourself. This is what the article looks like. Okay, Protected User Security Group. Now, if we look down, the benefits of this. All right, so device protections for signed-in protected users. So when a user is part of this group, credential delegation will not cache the user's plaintext credentials, even with the allowed delegating default credentials. So this account was used for like a service account or something, and we had enabled a delegation feature with some kind of older system or something. It's never going to cache anything in clear text. beginning with 8.1 and server 2012 R2, digest will not cache the user's plain text. Okay, we said that already. NTLM will not cache the user's plain text credentials. So if your company is still using the older protocol called NTLM maybe for backwards compatibility, there's not going to be any plain text. So this is a guarantee. No plain text caching in memory or anything like that. If there's any kind of spyware on a system, it's not going to be able to see somebody's password. Kerberos will no longer create DES or RC4 keys. Those are old. And one of the problems you run into here is that companies will have upgraded their domains over the years. From like Windows NT4 to Windows 2000, then to 2003, and then to 2008, and then to 2012, and then to 2016, and then to 2019, and then to 2022. You run into that whole situation where there's still all this old configuration that's been left in place ever since the 1990s. So this is a guarantee that any of these accounts, it's not going to allow any of that sort of thing. So then it also says a cache verifier is not created in sign-in or unlock, so offline sign-in is no longer supported. That is one thing you do need to consider. If there's no connectivity with the domain controller, at that point, this person is not going to be able to log on if they're part of the protected users group. Now, how do we make somebody a protected user? Well, we'll go to Server Manager, we'll go to Tools, we'll open up Active Directory Users and Computers. Here it is. We'll go to the Users folder. And then from there is a group called Protected Users. All you got to do is put the user in this group, and at that point, they become a protected user. Okay, so if I wanted to put myself in there, I could. All right, just double click. But at that point, keep in mind you won't be able to do the offline cache log on or any of that. Where if you don't have a domain controller, you're not going to be able to log on. Okay, but hopefully now that makes sense and helps you understand the concept of the Protected Users group.
Now I'd like to show you a couple different ways that we could set up a RODC, all right, a read-only domain controller. The first method I'm going to show you is known as just pre-staging a RODC server. Now this is the way you would do things if you have not set up a server yet that's going to be your RODC server, but you plan on setting up a server that's going to be your RODC server in the future, okay? So perhaps you are located in New York, but you've got an office in Birmingham, Alabama that's really small. It's only got 10 people, and you're going to be maybe sending a server down there or shipping a server down there, and you just want to be able to plug it in and have somebody just step through configuring it real quick. Then you could do that. You wouldn't even have to be present when this promotion occurs. If you do what's called pre-staging. So let me show you how pre-staging works, all right? Here we are on NYC DC1. This is our domain controller. And we're going to open up Server Manager. Of course, you can click Start and go to Server Manager if you don't know how to get in there. Okay, from there we're going to go to the Tools menu, and we're going to go to Active Directory Users and Computers. Okay, so we're going to bring up Active Directory Users and Computers now. And from there, you'll notice you have the OU, the organizational unit, which is a folder here that's going to contain domain controllers. And currently we only have one domain controller. So if we wanted to do what's called pre-staging a RODC, we can right-click that container. And you'll see an option that says pre-create a read-only domain controller. Now remember, you can't just right-click anything. It's got to be that container, domain controllers. Okay, so we're going to click to pre-create RODC account. Okay, we're going to click next on the welcome screen. It says, okay, which privileges, which credentials are you going to use to do this? So I'm going to use my administrator credentials in order to do this. All right, specify the account credentials to use in the installation. Okay, so it's going to be my admin credentials. You could specify some alternative credentials if you wanted to. All right, but we're going to use the ones that we have signed in. All right, so we're going to click next. It says, okay, what do you want the computer name to be? Okay, I'll name it, I'm just going to call it RODC test. This is just a demo anyway. Okay, so RODC test. All right, I'm going to click next. It's going to verify there's not already a computer out there named RODC test. There cannot be a computer out there with this name right now. You have to remember, you're pre-staging this, so you're setting this up before you even have a server configured yet. Okay, then it says, which site do you want to go with? I'm not explaining Active Directory sites right now, so we're just going to go with this default site. Okay, not explaining sites at the moment.
This would be the location. Technically, I'll say that if you had a location in Birmingham, Alabama, you might have a Birmingham site. You would specify that, but I'm not going to explain that right now. I'm going to hit next. Okay, it's going to check DNS information. All right, and essentially just verifying if there's a DNS name out there, if there's a certain IP address or something that goes with this, then at that point it will pop that up. Of course, you can also speed this process up by disabling your network adapter card. It won't take as long, which sometimes I get annoyed by it taking so long. So if I want to cause this to get done quickly, what I'll do is I'll go right here to Ethernet, change adapter options, and I'll just disable the NIC real quick and then re-enable it, and that will trigger it to finish a little quicker. As you can see, it's done now. Sometimes it can take like 5 minutes for it to finish, and this way it just kind of gets it to skip searching DNS a whole lot. Okay, do you want to put DNS on the RODC? You can. Do you want it to be a global catalog server? You can. I'm not going to make it be a DNS, but I will allow it to be global catalog. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click next. All right, it says, all right, so this is important right here. This is very important. This says, the user or group that you specify will be able to attach a server to the RODC account that you are creating now and complete the RODC installation. They will also have local administrative privileges. Okay, so imagine if I was, if somebody in Birmingham, Alabama, I'm in New York City, okay, we have Birmingham, Alabama, and we just have like 10 people that work in that office, and they're all salespeople. So they're not like IT savvy people. However, I could specify one of their names. Let's say it's the sales manager, whoever that is, and I could give them admin privileges just locally on this server so they can help me configure this server once we have the server in that office. Because literally what I'm wanting to happen is I'm wanting somebody to basically just be able to plug the server in, and they'll be able to install ADDS with these admin privileges, and it's going to finish doing everything. They're not going to have to configure anything. All they got to do is a couple of clicks, and it's going to finish. So that's what this is going to do. This is going to give an account the authority to do that. All right. Now in my case, I'm just going to put myself in there. So I'm just going to choose myself. But in the real world, if you had somebody in that office you wanted to point to, you could. All right. At that point, I'm going to click next, and we're going to click next again, and we've officially created a little pre-staged RODC account. Okay, so at that point, you would be able to set up a server, and as long as you named it RODC-test, and you join the domain, that person in that office could log in with their credentials, and they could finish the setup. All they got to do is a couple of clicks, and it's officially set up. This was, in the earlier 2000s, this was, considered beneficial for, to have this kind of connection set up. To be honest with you, almost nobody ever uses this anymore to set up a RODC. Most everybody, if they're going to set up a RODC, they can do it remotely using remote desktop, or they would just install the RODC locally, and they would just ship the server down to the office, and that would be an easy way to deal with it. Okay. Now, alternatively, something else I want to show you here. You'll notice the little black arrows pointing down. That's just to indicate that currently there has been no server that has occupied this yet. You'll notice it says unoccupied. So the server hasn't gotten control of it yet. But the other thing I want to show you, if we right-click this object and we go to properties here, you're going to see the password replication policy. Okay, so this is where I can go and I can specify which accounts it's going to cache for password authentication in that office. So currently, you're going to say it's going to deny everybody except one group. So if I had a salesperson, I could put that salesperson into this allowed RODC password group, and that anybody that's in that group, it's going to synchronize their password unless they're an admin. Unless there's a deny. Okay, so I don't have any additional users, but I'll show you. Like, I'll just create one real quick. We'll call this let's see, John Smith,
logon name is going to be just John Smith. All right, let me put password in for the user. Okay, and we won't make the user change password right now. We're going to put John Smith in that group. So if you'll notice, you have that group. Let's go right here to John Smith. We're going to click member of. We're going to do a quick search for the word password. Oops, actually, easiest thing to do, let's just say find now. All right, and you'll see the allowed RODC password replication. So we're going to double click on that, click OK, and he's now a member of that group. So John Smith, who maybe John Smith is, you know, he's in that office, the Birmingham office. All right. And he is maybe like a sales manager or something. So he's, you know, he's in that group. It's going to cache his credentials. So that is how you configure RODC so that it will cache somebody's credentials. Okay. So the other way that you could have done this is just to go straight over to the server. Okay. So I have NYC server 1 right now, and I could jump over to that server. Let's jump over. Here we are. This is NYC server 1. He is not a domain controller. Okay, I could go ahead and say manage, add roles and features, next, 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 and we're going to install Active Directory just like we would a normal domain controller. Okay, so next, 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 and install. We'll give that a moment and let it install. Okay, once ADDS is done installing, you can just click OK to that. At that point, we're going to go up to this little warning symbol. We're going to click Promote the server to a domain controller. All right, and it's going to say Add a domain controller to an existing domain. RODC, of course, is going to be joined to an existing domain, so that is definitely going to be the object or the option that we go with. All right, from there, we're going to go ahead and click Next. All right, now warning, if you get an error message, if you're doing this with me and you get an error message just trying this out, it usually means that your computer is no longer pointing to the domain controller for DNS. So what you need to do is you need to jump over to the domain controller, you need to go to command prompt, you need to do an ipconfig and find out what the address is of your domain controller, jump back over to the server. You'll go up here to local server. Okay, go back over here to your Ethernet assigned by DHCP. Just click on that. Go to the properties of your adapter and verify that you've got the correct address in right here. It's very important. If you don't, you're going to get an error. Okay, that's if you're doing this with me. Okay, so we're just we could have a DNS installed on this machine, we could global catalog, and this is where we can choose RODC right here. So at that point, we could choose RODC, directory services restore mode, password, just like we've done before. We can click next. All right, we can specify, it says accounts that will be allowed to replicate. We can go ahead and specify the account passwords that are going to be replicated and cached. We can specify those if we want. All right. Says, okay, you want to replicate with any domain controller. That's fine. By the way, you can, if you have a backed up copy of Active Directory, you can do install from media to let you specify the backed up copy of Active Directory. That's a great way to save time if you're replicating a large, big database across a slow connection. If you had a copy of it, of Active Directory on a flash drive, even if it's an out-of-date copy, it'll update once it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next now. We can specify our database log location, and at that point, we're now officially ready to pull the trigger. It would do the prerequisite check, and we would click Install. We've got ourselves a RODC. I'm not actually going to do that to this server because I have other usage for this, other usage for this server that I want to use it for. But now you've seen exactly how you can set up a RODC server.
Let's go over the concepts now of hardening a domain controller. Now, besides the common stuff like, of course, keeping the domain controller updated and limiting physical access to it and making sure that, there's only certain admins that have the ability to log on to, those are pretty common sense things, right? The big thing to look at would be policies. There are group policies that we can implement that can strengthen the defenses of a domain controller. And this is also going to go back to the whole problem of the fact that domain controllers have been around now for, decades, and they've some of them have just been upgraded over the years, and some of these old settings from like the 1990s even could still be enabled on our domain controllers. And so we want to make sure that we check certain criteria to make sure that our domain controllers are strengthened against certain types of attacks. So let me show you a little bit about how we're going to do that. Here we are on my NYCDC1. I'm going to open up Server Manager. Then we're going to go to Tools, and we'll go to Group Policy Management. Okay. The first thing to be aware of here is that you have a GPO dedicated to your domain controllers, which is this guy right here. And that's really what you want to focus on. That GPO is attached to your domain controllers OU, which of course affects all of your domain controllers. So we're just going to edit that GPO, okay? And what we want to focus on is going to be under Computer Configuration, Policies, Windows Settings, and then underneath this Security Settings area here. And then from there, you have Local Policies, and then you have Security Options. Okay, so these are the types of things that you want to be thinking about in regards to your domain controllers. So you want to kind of educate yourself on some of these policies, okay, on some of the things that, you might want to allow or disallow for your users. Another thing, though, is user rights assignments. This gets into who has privileges over your domain controllers, okay, to do whatever it may be. Right now, you'll notice that it says everyone has the ability to access this computer across the network. All right. So you actually you might want to take away that everyone group. You might not want to allow that everyone group on there, right? That's a consideration. Take off the everyone group. You might say, well, would that stop regular users from authenticating to a domain controller? No. Regular users would still be able to authenticate to a domain controller, but you wouldn't just allow anonymous connections to even touch that domain controller. Okay, that's just an example of it. Add workstations to the domain. Right now, authenticated users can add workstations to the domain. Actually, one thing they don't tell you is that regular users can join up to 10 computers to the domain. An individual user can do that, believe it or not. You might not want regular users doing that, so you might want to just make it where only admins can do that. Okay. What about things like log on locally? Right now, you can see that all of these groups here can do that. Arguably, you could say, well, I only want administrators and maybe backup operators so they can back data up. So you might want to remove everything except administrators and backup operators. Okay. And then, things like changing the system time. I might not want server operators doing that. I might only want, the local service. You have to allow that. The system needs to be able to change its own time. But then the administrators. Why is it such a problem for anybody to change the system time? The reason it's a problem is because of Kerberos. Kerberos only allows a 5-minute leeway period. Okay, if the time is off more than 5 minutes, you won't see it in this policy. It's actually going to be the Kerberos policy set in the domain policy here. But if you look under security and then local policy and then account policy and then Kerberos, you can see it gives a 5-minute leeway period. That basically means that if people's clocks are off more than 5 minutes in either direction, then nobody can log on. That person cannot log on. Whether it's a server, the server won't be able to authenticate, or whether it's a client operating system, if it's more than 5 minutes off, the person will not be able to log on. This is why you don't want people messing with time. Now, one thing people ask me sometimes is, well, what about time zones? Are time zones going to affect this? Absolutely not. Time zones don't matter. Okay, when it comes to this, they do not affect this at all. All right. So let's go back over here. So you got all these various, options here. How about things like, let's see, deny access to this computer across the network. You might want to, deny the guest here. All right. So there's a group called guest. We might not want guest users connecting ever, accessing across the network. Force shutdown from a remote system. Let's see. Right now, server operators can do that, but I might only want admins being able to do that. All right. Let's jump back over to security options. And one of the big ones is if we look down here at network security. Let me find it. Okay, here it is right here. LAN manager authentication level. All right. LAN manager is the old protocol that was back in the 1990s. There's even some cases where there's some services left over from the 80s, from back in the MS-DOS LAN manager days. And of course, when NT came out, they came out with new technology, LAN manager. But right now, Windows could potentially communicate with legacy systems. So what they recommend you do is choose this option right here. Send NTLM version 2 responses only. Refuse LM and NTLM. That means that it'll still allow what's called NTLM version 2, but it will not communicate using LM and NTLM. So that adds a layer of security to this. Okay. And by the way, I'm purposely not changing any of this stuff right now. I don't want to affect anything that on this domain controller at the moment, because I'm going to be doing some other demonstrations. I'm just showing you what you would consider implementing, though, in an environment, and the kinds of things Microsoft is really wanting you to think about when it comes to hardening a domain controller. That's why you'll notice I'm not actually clicking OK on this stuff. All right, but anyway, all right. So that NTLM thing is obviously something to keep in mind as well. Let's see, we have network security. Let's see, restrict NTLM, and I was looking for the audit. Okay, yeah, so there it is, audit incoming NTLM. So this is one that you would generally want to turn on. This is going to turn on auditing. It's going to show you if anybody's trying to authenticate using the older standards. So enable auditing for domain accounts or all accounts being the better one. And that way, what will happen is, if we go over here to Event Viewer, right-click Start, go to Event Viewer, your audit log, your security log will pick up on this guy right here, this log here, will pick up on anything that's trying to authenticate, and you'll have log entries that'll show up right here. I got a lot of log entries right now, so it's taking a while to pop up, but that's basically where those log entries will show up at. Okay, so definitely turning on auditing is usually a good idea. Okay, so anyway, one thing you want to think about, in the real world when it comes to securing this, is familiarize yourself with some of this stuff, some of these policies. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds. There's actually thousands of policies, but hundreds when you start getting into the security side of this. Securing a DC, so it's impossible to explain every one of these right now, but you can kind of familiarize yourself with some of the list here. You can double click on these. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory, but they do have an explain tab that'll help you understand it. But anyway, these two areas here are the two big areas you want to think about, and that's what I want you to remember. There's actually three things I want you to remember from this. I want you to remember that it's the default domain controllers policy GPO that you would want to edit for domain controllers. The second thing is I want you to remember, or the second and third thing I want you to remember, is that this is going to be under these security settings, and the two main areas are user right assignment, these are the rights people have, and then security options. Okay, that's going to involve the different security features turned on and off on that domain controller. All right, so that is hopefully going to now give you an idea of how we can harden DCs in Active Directory. Let's talk about the concept of authentication policy silos. So these are basically, an authentication policy silo is basically a container that allows administrators to assign specific user accounts, computer accounts, or even service accounts. And then using a policy, the admin can control that those user accounts can only authenticate to certain devices, like certain other servers. Okay, for example, imagine if I had a user that is like, maybe it's like a service account or something that's associated with Microsoft Exchange, and I only want that user ever authenticating with Microsoft Exchange. So if somehow, I don't know, a hacker got access to the password to it or something, some kind of identity theft scenario where they've gotten the admin's password, they've compromised it somehow, that account is only going to authenticate against that server, that Exchange server. So this is going to prevent that account from being used for anything else. Unless that account is removed from the authentication silo, you're basically linking it to this thing called the authentication silo. Once it's linked to that, whatever the policy says that you can authenticate with is the only thing you can authenticate with at that point. So that's the idea. So let's see how we can create an authentication policy silo. So here we are on NYC DC1, and I am going to open up Server Manager, go to Tools, then we're going to go to Group Policy Management. Once we're in Group Policy Management, all right, we'll go over here and let's just create a GPO. I'll call this Auth Silo Demo. All right, and I'm going to edit that GPO. From there, I'm going to go under Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates. All right, and then we will go underneath System. And we'll move this over just a little bit here. We're going to go down to KDC, that's the Key Distribution Center. All right. And under the KDC, there is a policy called KDC Support Ticket, Support for Claims, Compound Authentication, and Kerberos armoring. This gets into giving out Kerberos tickets, essentially. And in order to support the authentication policy silo feature, you have to enable this support for claims, because it's going to use a system known as claims in order to do that. And we're going to configure this to always provide claims. Okay, so that's what it needs to be set to. All right. So for then, we're going to go ahead and click OK to that. We've turned that little policy on now. All right. And now what we'll do is we're going to go into Administrative Templates. All right, so Administrative Templates right here, and then we're going to go under System again, and this time we're going to go to Kerberos. All right, so if you got lost, that's how you get there. All right, and the policy we're looking for here is called Kerberos Client Support for Claims. So we're going to turn that on. This is going to allow us to allow clients to support this, client machines to support these claims. So we'll turn that on. All right, and then at that point we'll click OK and we'll close out of that. All right, so from there we can associate this with our servers if we want, and this is going to allow the servers to support claim authentication if you're dealing with servers, if it's servers that you're wanting to manage this on, and then also our domain controllers. Okay, so we can attach it to those two things. Okay, now I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to go to Server Manager. We're going to go to Tools, and we're going to open up ADAC, Active Directory Administrative Center, because this is not something you can do through Active Directory Users and Computers, which is the old system. All right, have to use the newer. And I say old, but I mean ADAC has been around now for what, 15 years, I think. So it's kind of old itself, to be honest with you. But anyway, here we are. And so looking here, we're going to click on Authentication. All right, and then from there you'll see we have Authentication Policy, right? And then there's a new option. If I right click that and I say New, and I'll say Authentication Policy. All right, and then it wants to give a display name. All right, so I'm going to call this Exchange AP. All right, and we'll leave that to enforce policy restriction. Okay. So that's all fine and dandy. Let's see if there's anything else here I need to do. Yeah, enforce policy restriction. All right, so we've got that set correctly. Now I'm going to go to the left here. We're going to click on user sign in or sign on, and then we're going to go right here where it says specify a ticket granting ticket lifetime for user accounts, and we'll just set that to 240 minutes. All right, so that's going to be the ticket lifetime that will allow them to utilize this when they make their authentication request. All right, so from there, I am going to click OK. And I should see that the policy is available. Right here, if I double click on it, so as you can see, it is available. Now let's go for the silo. So back here in Server Manager, clicking on Authentication, you'll see we have Authentication Silos. We're going to right click that, say New, Authentication Policy Silo. All right. And then at that point, all right, if we're going to create a authentication policy silo, let's just call this Restricted Exchange Administrators. Okay. And we will, let's see, we'll set that to enforce. So this is not just going to be auditing, it's going to be turned on. It's going to be officially enforced. Okay. Let's see. Let me just double check everything else here. All right, so underneath here where it says authentication policy, we're going to change this to use a single policy for all principals that belong to the authentication policy silos. This is just all accounts that are associated with it, and we're going to select our Exchange AP here. All right. From there, we will click OK. And let's just double click on it and make sure it was created. Yep, looks like it is officially there. All right. And so we can see that it is available. All right. So now let's go through and we will take a look at our users. So I'm going to jump right here on Exam Lab Practice and click on Users. And I can see all my users. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to create a user. And I will just call this, let's say, Exchange User 1. All right. A username will just be Exchange User 1. Give it a password. Okay. And now, most important, we're going to go over to Silo. All right. And we're going to assign our policy silo here. So we'll click Assign, and there it is, Restricted Exchange Admin. So we'll click OK, and that's been assigned. Now, granted, if the account had already existed, I could have just done that ahead of time. I could have just done that by double-clicking on the user and then going to Silo, and then there it is. Okay. So that is how we do it. So now, based on what we've done, if we go back over to our GPO, the GPO is attached to, so whatever servers are associated with this container, that user can authenticate with those servers, but that user cannot authenticate with anything else. That's it. So we've created this restricted user account that can only authenticate with those servers, and that is the idea of using the authentication policy silo. Let's go over the concepts now of restricting access to a domain controller. Now, to do that, we're going to use group policies. So here we are on NYCDC1, and we're going to open up the Server Manager. We're going to go to Tools, and then we're going to go into Group Policy Management. Once you're in Group Policy Management, here is our domain controller's OU. We're just going to expand that out. We have a GPO already attached here called Default Domain Controllers Policy. Now, that is automatic. Again, when you install a Microsoft domain, you are always going to have that GPO automatically. So I just right-clicked that, clicked Edit. Now I'm going to go under Computer Configuration, Policies, Windows Settings, and then Security Settings. And then I'm looking at where it says Local Policies, and then we're going to go to User Right Assignment. Now you can see the default policy settings for domain controllers right out of the gates here. Okay. So the main thing is access this computer from the network.
all right, you will notice that everyone can actually access this computer from the network, including accessing shares and all that. So normally what you'd want to do is get rid of the everyone group and only allow admins and all that. Now you do want to allow, you do need to consider the fact that for authentication you'll have the authenticated users group, but you don't need the everyone group. Okay. The next thing would be the log on locally. That's a big one. So you'll notice that regular users cannot log on locally to domain controller, so that's fine. But look at all these other groups that can. Print operators, server operators, backup operators. Now, backup operators and administrators are really the two that are recommended in a high security environment. Now, the reason backup operators are recommended is because backup operators need to be able to back up data in Active Directory. Okay, so backing up the Active Directory database, which is the ntds.dit file that's located on your operating system. Not that I'm getting into backing up Active Directory in this video, but just throwing that out there. So administrators and backup operators, those are the two big ones, okay, that you would want to keep in mind. All right. Lastly, you also have a deny logon locally capability, which, if you combine the two, allow logon locally and a deny will overrule the allow. So this is sort of like a guarantee scenario. Like, for example, let's say I had a user named John Smith who's a member of backup operators, but John Smith is he's a backup operator for a bunch of our other servers, but we never want John Smith being able to back up domain controllers for whatever reason. Well, what we could do is we could allow backup operators, and then we'd go in here and we could deny John Smith, and that would explicitly deny John Smith from being able to back up domain controllers, but it wouldn't deny John Smith from backing up other stuff. Whereas if you denied the backup operators group, it would deny all backup operators, so anybody that's a member of that group. Okay, all right. And so that is how that works. Now the last thing is allow logon through remote desktop services. This is going to allow somebody to remote desktop in to this machine. Okay, right now there's no restrictions on that at all. So pretty much anybody who is a member of that has the ability to do the allow logon locally and all that, they can also connect in through remote desktop. So you can be explicit about that if you want, or you can deny explicitly who you don't want to be able to connect in through remote desktop. Okay, all right. So those are your different policies for that. Keep in mind that these policies are assigned to the domain controllers OU. If you needed to have different policies for different domain controllers, you would need to create a sub, maybe a sub OU of some kind, and have different GPOs assigned to the subcategory OUs. All right, but those are the policies you'd want to keep in mind if you wanted to restrict access to domain controllers. Now, when it comes to account security for your users, there's a couple of considerations there. Number one is if I go to Server Manager on my domain controller and I go to Tools, Active Directory, Users and Computers, okay, from there I can choose a specific user maybe that I'm wanting to restrict here or manage. All right, I'll just create a user real quick here. I'm just going to right click users and create a user named John Smith. All right, and we'll do just type the name out straight like that, give it a password. Okay. All right, so the first thing you'll see here are these check boxes right here. Number one is user must change password at next logon. So when they log on, they're going to have to change their password. All right, you probably are already familiar with that one. User cannot change password. This make it where the user cannot change password. You can't have that checkbox checked. It'll throw an error like you just saw. This is usually going to be used in a situation where there's like a shared account between multiple users, but most importantly, it's used if you use a user account as a service account that is associated with the service, like SQL. and you don't want it changing the password, although there are better ways to do that, to deal with that, but not getting into that right now. There's password never expires. This makes it where the password will never expire. That's another example of if you were using this as a service account. And then account is disabled. This would be used if maybe you wanted to create the account, but the user isn't really starting yet, so you'll enable the account later down the road. All right, so we'll just click next and finish. Now we're going to edit John Smith. I'm just going to double click on John Smith. And you can see our various tabs here, but the main things I want to look at here is the account tab. So the account tab is going to have log on hours. You can set the hours. You're probably familiar with that one. And then log on to, you can set specific machines that the user can log on to by putting the names in right here. Probably familiar with that one as well. And then here's those same 4 checkboxes. The other thing is account expires. If I want to, maybe this is a consultant and the consultant is only going to be working for the company for a certain amount of time, like a 3-month contract, I can have the account where it deactivates after, let's say, 3 months, right? So I could set that up, okay? The other thing involving account security is going to be the member of tab. This is going to involve the groups that the user is a member of. So I can go here and I can add the user to whatever groups, give them authority if I want. For example, if I click that, advance, find now, I can see the various groups that are available. So, for example, if this user, maybe this user is going to be doing backups, I can make this user a backup operator. At that point, that user now has those privileges. Okay, now on the flip side of that, you want to go the other direction with it. You could make this user a domain guest, which is a restricted account. The user can log on to machines, but they don't get to keep a profile when they log on to the machine, and they're restricted on that machine what they can do. They can't install anything. They can only run applications that are on that machine, and they can use the web browser, but they don't actually even get a user profile. So that's the idea there. Okay, I am going to make John Smith a backup operator. So we'll go here, backup operator, click OK, and there you go. All right. Now what we'll do, last thing here would be, of course, group policies. As always, group policies is going to be another way for restricting accounts or providing access to accounts. And of course, I can do that by going into Server Manager, Tools, Group Policy Management. Okay, bring that up. And if we want to create a GPO, I'll call this Account Security. All right. And then I'll just edit that GPO. And then I can go under User Config Policies and then do administrative templates. And I have all these items here that would allow me to lock down what users can and cannot do through things like Control Panel, Desktop, Network. You're probably familiar with this already. Like I could set wallpaper settings for the person here if I want, control network settings, shared folder, start menu, manage the operating system settings. So that's a great way to restrict what somebody can do, right? And then you just need to associate this GPO with whatever organizational unit. If you wanted it to be the whole domain, I could throw it to the whole domain. If you had a particular OU you wanted this to be associated to, maybe I want to associate this to, the workstation's OU. Or in this case, if it's for users, you would want an OU that contained user accounts. But that is the other side of this. All right. Of course, there are like over 4,000 something policies. So there's obviously a lot of policies. You need to think about what it is you want to do as far as restricting your users go, and then you can look into the different policies that can achieve that. All right. So those are going to be your main ways that you can manage, that you can secure accounts in the Active Directory environment. Hey, this is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed getting to experience a little bit of this course, and I hope you'll join me on the full adventure. If you'll check the description of this video, you'll see a link that'll show you how you can get access to the full course. Now, in the full course, you're going to learn how to set up a practice environment where you can practice hands-on, and I'm going to provide you with lots of virtual simulations that you can do 24/7. All you need is a web browser. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll also give me a like and subscribe. I'm trying very, very hard to get this channel to build and grow, and so I hope you'll take the time to do that.